My name is Lee Ann Kizzar. I was born in Carthage, Missouri at McCune Brooks Hospital in 1968. Well, my name's Lee Ann, and that's my first and middle name. And my dad's name's Lee and my mom's name's Ann. They were very creative. Obviously, I'm the firstborn. My mom's dad was a farmer, and in Missouri, farms are smaller. He had a couple of hundred head of cattle and several acres of crop fields and hay fields and things like that. And so I grew up on a part of that farm. I didn't participate, but I got to see it all happen, and it was always fascinating in the summer. My dad worked at what is now the only dynamite plant left in the country. It was a quarter mile from our house. My mom's dad actually worked there before he got his farm rolling to make enough money to just farm. They both went to the very same high school that I did. Carthage is it's an old mining town. It's where the mine owners lived. It's Victorian era houses. It's all made with Carthage stone, which is a very smooth limestone. So my high school was rather majestic. It had stairways coming up two different sides. Started out that one side was for the boys and one side was for the girls, because the girls were required to wear skirts. But of course, by the time I was there, it was just two stairways to handle the mass of human bodies going up and down. Four stories of high school, no elevator. Well, high school was coming to an end, and I had taken the tests for the National Merit Scholarship. And my dad, being the frugal person that he is, we investigated schools in Missouri and the U of A. The U of A was closer than any of the schools in Missouri that I would want to go to. And they also offered the National Merit Scholarship. So I was a National Merit Scholar at the U of A, and they waived my out-of-state tuition. So it was even cheaper for me to go to school at the U of A than it was for in-state in Missouri. So that's how I wound up in Washington County. It took me forever to learn to spell Fayetteville when I had to hand address letters, to come down here. And then 4 years and a major change later, I graduated, and there really weren't any jobs available. My husband, Steve, was an engineering major, and it was right in the middle of the Gulf War, and people were laying off engineers left and right, so of course they weren't hiring any new ones. So we decided we knew how to be starving college students in Fayetteville, so we stayed. He went to grad school, and I went to work as a temporary in the Assessors Office for Sue Phillips in January of 1991.
And so how did that, from 91, how did you go from part-time to full-time, and then just kind of talk about your transition there? You did a lot of stuff there at the office.
I did. Well, I started as a temporary in 91, and my job was to take those big green bar printouts from the NCR computer with the daily data entry and check them against the handwritten assessment forms to see that what was handwritten on the form had gotten into the computer so that a tax bill could be generated. And I sat in a little corner all day long with a red pencil and checkmarked all these big printouts. And then eventually they decided maybe I could actually assess personal property. So I learned how to fill out the form and look up the values in the book. The state would give you a book every year of the values. You had to look up the vehicles and write it out, and you had to add it with a calculator, get the total. It was quite grueling to do all that by hand. So that's how come they needed more bodies, and that's how I got my foot in the door. And by July 29th, 1991, which 28 years ago today, I was hired full-time. There was an opening in the real estate department for an abstractor. And as luck would have it, my degree is in interior design, which means that I knew how to draw on Mylar with ink, it's kind of a specialized talent. Nobody does it anymore because, of course, we use computers to draw maps. But back in the day, we had Mylar maps in the assessor's office, and you use these special ink pens to draw the parcel lines. And since I already knew how to do that, that gave me a leg up in getting that job. And that's where I started. Well, in the assessor's office, we had the Mylar masters, and that's where we made all the changes. And then we would make blueprints from those for the public to look at. And then at some time, people would come in and get copies of those, and they would shrink them and have them formed into the plat books. Now that was for all the city property. For the rural property, we had these little 8.5 by 11 acetate sheets. They were kind of like an overhead projector slide. You know, like you used to flop that page out on the overhead projector. It was like that, and we drew on it with a felt tip pen to map the parcels in a section. There was one per section. And the county plat books were made from those. And every time you did a parcel split, you had to go update the map.
So talk about some of the challenges in the assessor's office when you were working there. I know one of the big ones was the reassessment, or what the right way to say that is.
Yeah.
Talk about what that project was and then how you got caught kind of in the middle of it.
Well, when I started, Sue had already recognized that values in Washington County were moving along faster than elsewhere in the state. And so she had implemented a project to try. She decided Springdale was moving faster than anywhere else. So they tried the city of Springdale, and basically we had a duplicate set of cards for the reassessment and a regular set of cards for just the regular assessment. And when I say cards, I mean these giant file cabinets full of a card for each parcel. And we had to get them out. You had to draw the house on them by hand and price the house out by hand. And it was just way too much effort. We could never keep up. It was obvious that we were never going to be able to get the project done in time to actually get values on the books that were current. What causes values to increase is basically that there's a lot of sales. And so as properties began to sell more often and more properties were being developed, that added to the workload on the abstractors, who are the ones who get the deeds from the circuit clerk and process them to change the names on the tax roll and create the new parcels that come out. And also, now you've got to appraise those properties. Plus, we're trying to do this reassessment on part of the county, so we don't have the manpower. We can't keep appraisers. Appraisers have to be trained and certified by the state in order to be able to do their job, and it takes a couple of years. Well, by the time we'd get them trained up with this fantastic real estate market that we had, it was a lot more profitable for them to go out and be a private appraiser. They had the training. All they had to do was go take a few exams, and I think they were certified to do that. And they could make $200 an appraisal. So why would you stick around at the county for $8.58 an hour? You know, it was just very difficult. So in 1994, Sue had heard of this company, and she'd been looking into them for a couple of years, called ACT, Arkansas Cama Technology. And a couple of brothers from Monticello and a programmer guy, owned it. They also had software that would value property. And it was called a CAMA system, Computer Assisted Mass Appraisal. And we all thought, oh, hallelujah. Because one of the problems is that we had all this information, but there was no way to link it together except manually. So we invested in the software and contracted with ACT to do the actual work and finish up Springdale, March 15th, 1994. And they were to have it finished by August 1st, 1994. That was interesting. I got pulled into a lot of when the appraisers were out trying to find parcels, because they had to go find everything and look at it and measure it. And there'd be parcels that weren't on the map because nobody'd ever actually gone out and done all that before. So I got involved in, we'll figure out where this parcel is and correct the map, and tomorrow we'll come back and get that information and we'll go out and look at it. And I have to add that Sue was very smart. In the court-ordered reappraisal of 1985, which was the last time anything had been reappraised, she insisted on maps being created. And that was the first time the county had parcel maps throughout for everything. And they weren't perfect, but they sure were a good starting point. And so that was where we started from, and we were always correcting and updating the maps. And if you can't find it, you can't appraise it.
So how did you go from being the part-time worker to chief deputy? I mean, how long did it take, and what did you do along the way to get there?
Well, when we started the reappraisal project, that involved computer systems. And then the circuit clerk got a computer system for indexing. So we would be able to look up the deeds on the index. We couldn't actually get the image of the deed yet, but we could go to the index and figure out which book to go get it in. And I convinced Sue that we needed a PC in the assessor's office. We didn't have any PCs. All we had were network terminals for the NCR, and only like 2 of them. I convinced her that we needed a PC so that we could connect to the clerk's office and use this index without having to actually go there. So she was like, okay. And she bought us one. And then, being the college kid, I was like, well, we can also do this other stuff with it. And so like the new subdivisions, we had 2 cards for every parcel. We had a ledger card and an appraisal card. And every time you set up a subdivision, you had to make these cards. And people would sit around with typewriters and they would make mistakes. And I devised a little program to go in and print these cards on a printer rather than having to manually deal with it. So using the little PC that she'd got us for the index, I started doing that. And when she figured out that I could do that kind of thing, then it kind of snowballed. Then she bought me a scanner, and I got Steve to help us add some more memory to the computer because by then it was kind of needing some help. So once we got past that one PC, and with the one PC, then she figured out, oh, well, Lee Ann can write my letters for me. So she would dictate her letters, and I would turn them out, on a word processor so they looked good, and she would sign them. And at that point, she decided that I needed to be her assistant, in addition to my duties as abstractor. So I did that for a while, and we built a level of trust that we worked well together. Sue and I worked well together. She's my other mom. And when we got the software, when the software came in-house and we got a server, she made me the network administrator, which basically means I babysat the server, made sure the backups went, and if anything went wrong, then I was to communicate with the people necessary to fix it. And then shortly thereafter, she decided I should be the chief deputy. And then that put me in charge of personnel, which to this day, I still don't like. But that's another story.
And that was in what year?
Probably 97, 96, 97, somewhere along there. I don't know. Sue was kind of winding down her time. She knew we needed to automate more things, go more digital. It wasn't her thing. And so that was one of the reasons that she did, put me in charge of things. And in 2000, she wanted to retire, and she said, you need to run. And I said, no. I said, I'll make a deal with you, though. I'll run the office if you'll run for office. And so we did. And she was, she was there. She did her job and everything, but most of the day-to-day responsibilities fell to me, which I was fine with doing. That didn't bother me at all. The next time around, then she told me that it was now or never. That she was going home, and I had to step up. So I did.
So talk about that. How were you convinced to do it? And I think you had said earlier that maybe you were somewhat reluctant, but talk about that decision.
I was very reluctant. I'm not a very public persona, as you kind of found out when you tried to track me down. Sue wanted to retire, and I couldn't blame her one bit. She'd served her time, and then some. But I didn't really want to be the big boss. And it came down to, we looked for someone else to run for the office, but we couldn't find anybody who would do it. And I knew that if just some random person came in, I probably couldn't keep my job because, I was loyal to Sue. And if they had come in as a newbie, they might have just let, especially top personnel, go. So it was kind of a self-defense thing. You want to keep your job, run for office. So I did. Fortunately, I didn't didn't have any opposition, so it wasn't too bad, too torturous on me. And it also let me do some of the things that I had seen all along that I wanted to do that we weren't doing as long as Mama Sue was around.
Talk about those. What are some of the things that you finally got to do now that you were in charge?
Well, one of the main things was we had those many, many file cabinets, probably between 30 and 40 file cabinets of paper records. And there was valuable information on them, no doubt. But, you know, if someone had the record you wanted, or if it got dropped behind a file cabinet, it was never to be found again. We were always losing records. We spent a whole lot of time looking for records. It just was inefficient. So one of the first things I did was I contacted AIM, Advanced Information Management, I think, and had them scan every bit of those paper records. And our software developer at ACT was able to set it up where we could attach those records to the parcels in the system. So when you're on the parcel, you just click the button and you can pop up all the scanned records attached to it. And everybody can look at the same record at the same time. It's not, just because I have it doesn't mean somebody else can't look at it. So we did all that with the records. And the other thing we did was, and this was a major ordeal, was get our parcels mapped into the GIS. We had no digital mapping when I started as the assessor. And that was my main goal, was because from the very beginning, and I don't remember when it was, probably 92 or 93, the university had a demonstration of GIS, and it was in Ozark Hall. And she looked at that and she said, "You go. You were just over there. You know where that is. You go to the meeting and you tell me what it was about." So I did. And I thought it was the coolest thing I'd ever seen. And then they told us that the computer they were using to do this, the PC, not the server, the PC was $50,000. And I'm like, oh, well, county government, we're never doing that. So in the years that passed, of course, the technology got cheaper and better. And you no longer had to be a guru to be able to use it. You could use a mouse and click and copy and paste instead of typing commands in via the keyboard. So that was one of the very first things that I wanted to do, was get that GIS up and running. It helps you value properties in ways that you just can't do without it. So we spent 2 or 3 years converting our paper maps to digital maps. I hired college students, I hired temps, tried to find smart people that could help us. That's what you do when you're in office. You find smart people to surround yourself with.
What about you talked earlier about the challenges of competitive pay. I know that's changed somewhat over the years with Johansson surveys and stuff, but how was that a problem for you keeping staff? And if so, how'd you deal with it?
Yeah, it's always a problem. That was one of the things, keeping salaries current with what's going on in Northwest Arkansas is very difficult. It's even difficult for me now as a private, working in private business. But hiring college students really helped. You could get good work, and the pay that the county was willing to pay to a college student was good money. You might not be able to support yourself and as a single parent on it, but you could, as a college kid, it was pretty good. So I'd get college kids come in for half a day and they could crank out the work. Sometimes we lost people to go to a better paying job. That happens. But I also tried to make it an environment where people liked to work there. I might not have been able to pay them salary, but I could provide them with good furniture. I could provide them with a good place to sit all day, a comfortable chair. I could provide them with good equipment to work with. They didn't have to deal with a printer that jammed every 5 seconds. They would get a printer that worked when they needed it to work. Another thing that we did was we implemented an education program. So anybody that wanted to go to the state schools and get their appraisal certification, they could. Didn't matter if they were an appraiser or not. State paid for the education. The classes were free. They paid for room and board while you were down there. All it put me out was they were gone for a week for the class. And then if they got their certification, the state would give them a $500 a year bonus. So it's not much, but it's something. And we also did some Dale Carnegie classes, Dale Carnegie training. Because, basically the assessor's office is a public service office. You walk in, you assess your car, you walk in to talk about your property. You are seeing somebody that is trained to help you. And Dale Carnegie really helps with those interpersonal skills. Some of the people, they took it. It didn't really seem to make any changes. Some of the people, I saw dramatic changes in the way they were, in their confidence levels, in the way they were able to interact with the public, and the way they were able to interact in their own private lives. So we tried to make it a good place to work, even though the money, and that's what I was always told about the county. Well, the salary may not be that great, but it has great benefits. You get good retirement and you get good insurance, and of course all those things have kind of whittled away now, but we tried to make it a pleasant environment to work in to help offset the lack of actual pay.
Talk about the different judges that you worked with and under during your time you were there. I guess Johnson was in there when you started.
Yeah,
kind of walk me through them.
Judge Johnson was the judge when I went to work there. I went to work in the old courthouse. The new courthouse had already been purchased by the county and was under renovation. We actually moved to a temporary office there before I was hired full-time. Judge Johnson and Roger Haney were very good to us, took good care of us. When we needed to purchase computers for our personal property setup, the judge and Roger helped us get our bid specs and get everything going, and helped us find somebody to provide those computers for us. And then Judge Hunton came along, and his administrator, John Gibson, and since John was with the 911 office prior to that, he was familiar with the GIS systems, and John was very helpful with everything that I wanted to do with the GIS. John was fully on board. And of course, by then, he and the judge, of course, they were in charge of the road department, 911. So I was able to get cooperation from those folks for road locations, and because the road locations go with the parcels, which go with the aerial photos. It all has to come together in the GIS, and everything has to jive. One person's vision of the other doesn't always work, so we all had to cooperate to make it work. And Judge Hunton and Judge Gibson and Don Gibson were both very helpful in that.
What about some of your key staff members that helped you accomplish the many things that you did?
Dan Seifert was my chief deputy, and he is now again the chief deputy in Washington County. He was very helpful. I'm not good at conflict. And so if we had a problem and we had to confront somebody, he was always there by my side and would help me. He just helped keep things running smoothly. You have to, and I knew this going in because I saw it when Sue was away. The elected official is in Little Rock a lot for meetings or other places. They're gone probably a third of the time for meetings and other things that they need to be doing. So, the cat's away, the mice will play. So you need a good chief deputy there to keep things running smoothly. And, and I saw it, and I was probably one of the people that took advantage of the boss being gone. Everybody does. So that was one of the reasons that you have to have staff that you trust to take care of things while you're gone. And Dan always did that. And then William Stevenson was in charge of the real estate part of things, and Lee Rochester was in charge of the personal property side of things. And they helped keep it running.
What were the challenges in place when you left? I mean, obviously you had increased transactions and a lot of work, but what were the challenges though when you left?
Well, we had connected the Fayetteville and Springdale, Fayetteville and Springdale, Fayetteville and Lincoln offices first through the phone companies, and then eventually Springdale, we actually have a dedicated fiber when they moved the revenue office there. So that wasn't really an issue. It's just mostly personnel, keeping people in the positions that you need them in, keeping those positions staffed, especially in the winter. Assessing season starts January 1st. Well, guess what? So does cold and flu season. So you've got people sick, you've got people's kids sick, calling in, oh, well, we need you to go to the Lincoln office. We need you to go to the Springdale office today. That was always a challenge, was personnel, keeping everybody happy and doing their jobs.
Quorum, let me ask you this, what about the other county officials? Obviously, you got to know them pretty well. Who were some of the ones you got to know, and how'd you get along with them?
Well, in the circuit clerk's office, Betty Stamps was the clerk, I guess the entire time I was assessor. Kathleen Harness was the clerk before her when I was an employee. And Betty was very helpful. The trickle down is the deeds get filed in the clerk's office, then they come to the assessor's office for the name changes and parcel splits, and then the data goes to the collector for taxes to be collected. So those 3 offices are involved in the collection of taxes. And so I worked with Betty because in the old days when it was all manual, you'd miss deeds. Somebody was the one choosing which copies of documents you got. So once Betty got her digital system, then she and I worked together, and Steve wrote us a program where I could just run it, and it would go get the day before, it would go get all the recordings that I needed by category. So if it was any kind of a transaction instrument, we'd get a copy of it, and we just printed them out and worked from there. And so that saved her time, it saved me time and effort, and it made the accuracy a whole lot better. And then when we wanted to put some of that information on the internet, I went and asked Betty about it, if she would allow it to be attached to the property search, and she was good with it. And so we did really well there. And then David Ruff was the collector when I was the assessor. And for the most part, everything went smoothly. David wasn't, Betty'd worked in the office before she became the clerk. David had never worked in the office. So he was kind of more like what you have now, a politician in charge of a bunch of people who knew what they were doing. So sometimes we didn't see eye to eye because, I grew up in it. I came up through the ranks. And so I thought I knew how it should be done. But David was cooperative, and we were able to put the tax receipts online with the property search. So kind of a one-stop shop for everybody. Back in the day when it was run on the county servers and the county's the one that did it. And of course, Steve won't tell you this, but he's the one that wrote it all. Did all the programming on it. So it was nice to be able to get all that information together for our customers.
You were talking about politicians, and the races are by party, but once the people get in there, are Democrats and Republicans or whatever, are they able to, in the county most of the time, work together regardless of that?
I don't know what it's like now, but back in the day, we used to say that, we ran as a party, but once we're there, we're there to work for the people. It doesn't matter what party you are. It seems like everybody's a little more polarized now, so I don't know how well that works today. But in the day, yes. And that was one of the things that Sue always, like I said, she was my second mom. Well, she taught me about working in politics, working in government. And that was one of the things, was it didn't matter what your party was, everybody was there to work for the people. And you were to be very, very careful and never, ever cross county business with personal business. If you were driving a county vehicle, you didn't do a personal errand. You were very careful with where and when you drove the county vehicle. You were very careful with expenses, keeping your expenses separate from county expenses. For instance, when you traveled, if you went to dinner, you paid for your part of the meal with with the credit card, and if there were any drinks to be paid for, that was a separate ticket. We were very, very, very careful to keep everything above board and keep records. I don't know if it's still that way today, but that's the way Mama Sue taught me to do it. And I still turn in my expense reports detailed to the max.
Any thoughts of maybe trying to get back in it, or?
I never wanted to be a politician in the first place, so no. I'm actually very, very happy doing what I'm doing now. After I left the Assessor's Office, I went to work for Arkansas Cama Technology. I'd actually worked with them for a very long time in the Assessor's Office. I knew the people there well, the owners of the company. So they gave me a job. I don't think they knew what to do with me for the first couple of months, but we started getting busy. There started to be a demand for our software in Louisiana, so I kind of took on that project. And we now have 14 parishes using our software in Louisiana. And then an opportunity came along. The three owners wished to step aside and eventually retire. So they offered four of us the opportunity to buy into the company. So today I'm a partner in ACT. And it's very fulfilling. I have lots of projects that I get to work on. I get to help other assessors. What I learned working at Washington County has served me well. I've learned a lot working with these other assessors. We have 30 some odd clients in Arkansas with our software. And I work in the software side. I work with the programmer and have the software and IT support people. I manage them, much to my chagrin, but I have to manage people. But it's very fulfilling.
What else comes to mind? Maybe things I haven't thought to ask about, or things that just...
Oh, there were lots of adventures along the way. That reappraisal that we started in '94 triggered a lawsuit about the Amendment 59 millage rollback, which the state agency, the ACD, told us we didn't need to do because we weren't doing a complete county-wide reappraisal. Turns out the courts didn't see it that way. The county was sued, and of course we didn't have the data that we needed to defend ourselves. So we went back through old records, and that was kind of part of my job, was to help coordinate gathering that data. And then of course, since I had done that, now I got to be the expert witness. And so at a young age, I got to learn to work with lawyers and be on the witness stand and sit through depositions and things like that. So it was pretty exciting. And of course, we all know how that case turned out. The county owed its taxpayers so many millions of dollars. I can't remember exactly what it was like. I do know that I held a check in my hand at one point for $18 million when we did the refund. And Steve and I worked on the refund. We built software to make it actually work. And that was a process in and of itself, just dealing with all that.
Now you're talking about the lawsuit filed by Dale Evans.
By Dale Evans, yeah.
And it was kind of odd because Dale had long supported Sue, and then he ended up suing her office. Talk about that and how that went down.
Yeah, Dale was always a friend and still was. But he had sued the city of Fayetteville successfully about a sales tax. And of course, it's very lucrative for the lawyer if he wins, because it's a large amount of money, the settlement is. Then he gets a percentage. So he decided it was the thing to do, I guess. I don't know. I never quite got, I was still a youngster then. So I wasn't privy to a lot of the upper level conversations. But yeah, it was all very friendly in a way. I wound up working with Rudy. What was Rudy's last name? He was the Fayetteville Schools attorney and attorney for lots of other schools in Washington County. And Charlie Harwell, he was the Springdale Schools attorney. And so they were defense attorneys along with our own attorney, George Butler. Wow, I wish Rudy's last name would come to me. Rudy Moore, that was it. Yeah, of course, he's gone now. But he was a good guy. They were all good guys, and they took good care of me. I think one time on the witness stand, some lawyer was badgering me, and one of them stood up and said, "She's already asked and answered the question, move on." So I enjoyed working with them. We probably came out of it as best we could, with the data and information. It just depended on your interpretation of Amendment 59, which is, by the way, very, very vague. I learned a lot about reading law during that.
If someone came to you and said, "Lee Ann, tell me about Washington County, what's it like?" what would you tell them?
Well, I'd tell them, first I would not tell them where it was, but I would tell them it was a fabulous place. It has all the different things. It has urban areas, it has rural areas, it's very peaceful. The people here are progressive, and they care, and they want better things. I think that's what makes Washington County great, is its people. And of course, those people aren't necessarily native. They've chosen to live here. And it's kind of like being adopted. If you're just born to somebody, well, they just got you. But if you were adopted, they picked you out. Well, Washington County is my adopted home. I chose it. I picked it. And I wouldn't live anywhere else in Arkansas. In fact, when I'm in Little Rock at meetings, I tell people when I leave, I'm going back to God's country. I'll see you later. And when I get through that tunnel, that's when I know I'm home. Oh, my favorite thing about Washington County has to be, that's where I found my husband, Steve. He's the smartest person I know. And that's more important to me than just about anything else.